What's up? I'm going to be talking to you today about why this episode rocks. This episode is the Jason Davis interview on the Made It in Music podcast. It is an absolute banger, as the kids say these days. We talk about the 3 keys to success in the music industry: patience, prayer, and proactivity. Jason is an absolute legend. He's been around the industry for a while, worn a lot of hats in the business, on everything from management to having success as a songwriter to helping run a label to helping develop artists, and to working with Radar Label Group, who's worked with Jimmy Eat World, Plain White Tees, Neon Trees, and the Unlikely Candidates as well. This is one that you're going to want to listen to all the way to the end. And one of my favorite parts about this interview is the fact of just how long this guy kind of kept showing up and knocking his head against the wall to make things happen. And if you see all the stuff he's working on nowadays, it is indeed happening for him. But it did not always start that way. In the beginning, he kind of barely knew the ins and outs of the music industry, and went from that to now being a full-time music entrepreneur and helping so many artists get onto the map. The latest of which he's working with is a up-and-coming artist named Austin French. So make sure you pull out a notepad on this one, take notes, and let us know what you think. We have been working really hard to bring you some amazing Made It Music podcast episodes, so check out the Jason Davis one now, and make sure to check out the deep dive as well. It's really, really good stuff. It's all at madeitmusic.com. What is up? Seth Mosley here on the Made It Music podcast. We've got a good one for you here. We've got Jason Davis, my new friend.
Yes, nice to be here.
It's funny, we were just talking about before we dive into this. It's funny how, like, sometimes meeting people, it takes like doing a podcast together to get us together, because both of us have been wanting to meet each other for a long time now, but finally making it happen, thankfully.
Very happy about that.
So before we jump in, just want to make a quick announcement that this past month at Full Circle Music has been super exciting on our social media accounts. We decided that to better serve you all, we would divide up some of our social media accounts, and basically we turned our Full Circle Music Instagram into a Full Circle Publishing Instagram account. We have a lot of pieces going on at Full Circle Music, and we just created a brand new Full Circle Music Instagram page. So these changes are going to not only help us better serve you all by providing, different types of content for each account, but will really allow you to be clued into what Full Circle Music Publishing and Stacy Wilbur are up to, as they provide so many awesome resources to you that we want you to know about. So head over to @officialfcmusic, as in Full Circle Music, and @FCM Publishing on Instagram, and check it out. All right, let's jump in. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Man, so manager, author, entrepreneur, songwriter, you just kind of do it all.
Well, I mean, it's been 22 years now, heading on 23. So I think just all the years have been doing it, and having to at moments reinvent myself, just to stay relevant and find the path where God has me, has led me to, and I'll say this, I've always been very open. I've always been open to wherever God is leading me. And I've also, when it comes to business, can't say this in my personal life too much, but when it comes to business, I've never really had any fear. And so I'm open to try anything, do anything. I'm not afraid to fail. So I think that's led me to dabble in different areas and land in different places. So
yeah. Well, man, as I was just doing a little research on you and your story and trying to kind of prepare for this podcast, I've kind of come up with what I think are 3 things that really stand out in your story, and I think will be a big benefit to everybody listening today, and that is what I'm kind of calling this morning the title of Patience plus Prayer plus Proactivity equals Music Business Success.
Love it.
and you've exemplified that really well. So let's start with chapter 1, which is the patience part.
Yes.
Take us way back. How did this whole thing start for you?
Like getting into music?
Yeah.
Well, I guess you could call it patience. I didn't really understand the journey I was on when I was a kid. I always thought that people in the music industry were the people that were on my television, and people from small towns like me did not get into the music business. But I became just in love, kind of addicted to songwriting as a kid. And so I didn't really understand that this was the beginning of a patient journey. But I basically, at times living at home when I was a teenager to eventually in my early 20s, having a job, living on my own, I always wrote songs every day. There was probably very few days over, I would say 15 to 23, maybe about 8 years that I did not write songs. So it was just something that I did every day. And then when the door cracked open to the music industry and I actually got in it, which I couldn't have even thought was possible, I think just seeing that I had been writing for 8+ years, maybe 10 years with a band, but 8 years on my own, I think I saw that, wow, here I've been doing this for 8-9 years, and then a door cracked open. And then once I was in the room that I wanted, dreamed of being in, I think I always realized that, hey, this thing was 8 years, 9 years in the making. So if I enter into something and it takes me 5 to 10 years to get there, it's not the end of the world as long as I'm on the path to get there. So. Sure.
So started as a songwriter, and you had some success as a songwriter, but you have this interesting story that we were talking about before of it really started with like 5 chords.
Yes.
Do you care to share what you had shared with me about that with the audience? Because I think it's a fantastic story.
Yeah. So I was first in a band, and I was in a band real young, like 13, 14. Like we had a drummer, guitar player, me. And then when I was 15, I got a acoustic guitar through my cousin. My first cousin was throwing out an acoustic guitar, and I got it. And I took one guitar lesson in my whole life. And in that guitar lesson, the guy taught me how to play Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen.
Nice.
And then I had a friend of mine who was a guitar player that taught me how to play a song from Poison called Every Rose Has Its Thorn, which is really simple. And I think it's 5 or 6 chords, the whole song. And I remember sitting in my room at 15, and I was playing Every Rose Has Its Thorn, and I literally had this thought in my bedroom in my parents' house. I thought to myself, if this song could be a #1 hit for them, this band that I love, and these are the chords, why can't I take these 5 chords or 6 chords and write my own #1 hit song to it?
Yeah.
And I literally, for the next, I would say 8-9 years, wrote well over 300 songs. And there was very few songs that I did not use those 5 chords. I mean, I would say I almost never wrote a song that did not have those exact 5 chords in it for the rest of my 8-9 years. It was working for me. I knew the chord progression. I knew when I went to a G that it inspired me. And I realized, well, if these 5 chords inspire me and I could keep writing, I don't need anything else. And so I basically wrote those 5 chords over 8-9 years to what I thought in my childhood bedroom to a #1 hit song, and that's what cracked the door open to the music industry for me. So
that's amazing. So how many did it? You mentioned it was over 300 songs.
Yeah.
Was it like, where was it in that process that you landed that first #1 hit? Was that like at the beginning of it? Was
probably like song 349?
Okay. So what was it in those first 300-ish songs over those years that kind of kept you going to do it?
Well, when I was 12, 13, and 14, from 12 to 14, there was a lot of abuse going on in my household, and there was a lot of stuff going on between my dad and I, and it was very abusive. And thankfully, later on in life, my dad accepted the Lord with me, and we had an amazing relationship towards the end of his life. But it was pretty brutal when I was a teenager. And to be very open, it was daily beatings. And I didn't, when you're a 13 or 12-year-old boy, there's really no one to talk to. If you talk to an adult, your dad might go to jail. If you talk to another kid, you might become an instant loser. Showing weakness in middle school or high school. And so I really felt like there was no one to talk to about it. And when I got that guitar from my cousin, and I had a guitar in my bedroom, it became literally my therapist. It became my girlfriend. It became my best friend. And I mean, I would cry to it. And the every time I would write a song, I was like really wrapping what was going on in my life in mystery. So, if I played a song for you, you couldn't figure out what was happening in my life, but I was still able to communicate it. And it felt safe, and it was very therapeutic. And I think it was the therapy of it and getting to create something. Every time I write a song, I felt like I almost like had a child.
Wow.
And so it was very therapeutic, and it's what kind of kept me alive during those teenage years. So it just became something that I couldn't stop doing. And I never was doing it thinking I was going to get in the music industry because I didn't think that was possible. I was just doing it because I loved it so much and couldn't stop.
Wow. Man, thanks for sharing that story. That's powerful for sure. I think songs, we're in a crazy time right now with all this COVID stuff, and I think there's a lot of people that are probably, whether they're in a similar situation to that or even just going through the craziness that is happening in the world right now, where songs are becoming that. They're becoming the life rafts or becoming the therapy, like you say.
Yeah.
So, man, thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
That's awesome. So, in that process, were you showing these songs to anybody, or was it really just kind of like you were writing them, that one's done, let's write another one?
Yeah, so I would always revolve around, I would gravitate towards friends in middle school and high school that were musicians, and some of them had little, like, recording setups at home. Like, a couple of friends of mine had 4 tracks and eventually went to 8-ats. And so I would just, I was a writing machine, and they were loving recording. Yeah. And none of my friends were writing as much as me. So I think a couple of these friends that had little 4 tracks saw that, wow, he's bringing songs to the table that I'm probably not writing. And so it was kind of there was a good chemistry there where I was bringing the songs and my friend was trying to grow as a producer. And so I would just record, maybe 4, 5, 6 songs a year, like the best ones I'd write. And I would give them out to friends, family, some coworkers who in the beginning when I was writing would laugh at me and then eventually turn into like, wow, you're pretty good, over the years. But what happened was there was a guy in my area who had a studio in his parents' house, and he had grown it over the years from like the 4-track to like a real recording studio. And I just always recorded with him over the course of 8 years, and I didn't know this, but he used to use my song that eventually landed on a record. He used to use it as his example when people would come into his parents' house to check out his studio.
That's awesome.
And he would say to people like, "Hey, I could do this for you. $500, I'll record a song for you." And he would show my song as his example. So there was a band in Christian music called Burlap to Kashmir.
I love them.
And
amazing musicians.
Yeah, and they had just broken up, and they had come off of a pretty awesome ride. They had broken up, and the keyboard player lived in that area and showed up at this guy's, because everybody kind of knew about this guy, that he had a studio in his parents' house, and it was a nice studio in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And so he ended up in that studio, and the guy showed him my song as the example of like, hey, I could do this for you. And the keyboard player recognized, like, that's a pretty good song. Sounds like that could work in Christian music. He was trying to shop a solo deal for himself. And he was the one that played my song, which I didn't even know was happening.
Oh, wow.
To Grant Cunningham at Sparrow. And next thing you know, I was living in upstate New York, and I got this phone call from Grant Cunningham that he had heard a song I wrote. So that's kind of how it all
So you
connected.
weren't like out pitching it and hustling and saying,
no. And I had no idea that you could even do that.
Yeah.
You know.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So obviously the songwriter side of you. I love that that's how you got into it, because now when you're working as a manager with any of your other ventures, you can understand that, yeah, all this stuff, it starts with a song.
Yes.
You can have the smartest marketing plan in the world, you can have the best team in the world, but if you don't have the song right on the front end, you got nothing.
I was actually saying this to somebody yesterday. I said, like, all the fight, all the pushing and fighting and challenging, like, it doesn't come when you release the songs. Like, you have to work behind, obviously, any product.
Yeah.
But the fight really is when you're creating, you know, because you can't change something that's already done, you know, and a product is a product.
Yeah.
And I always say, you know, all the power or lack of power is contained in that song. And you can't sell it. You can try to expose it.
Yeah.
But it's gonna do the work for you or not. You know.
Yeah.
So
I get that. I get that it is the start of it. But then the thing that I've and as I'm sure you've discovered is obviously the song has to be right, but then a million other things have to be right too.
Yep.
So it can't only be the song.
Sure.
Like, that's a part of it.
Sure.
So talk a little bit about your journey into, like, okay, from songwriter, what was the net? Was it like you jumped into becoming a manager after that, or like how did you?
Well, this is another crazy story.
Yeah.
Well, I think first, you know, I was pitching my songs aggressively. Once that door opened with Sparrow Records in Nashville.
You kind of learned, okay, that's the thing. Like
I realized, okay, you can do that.
Yeah.
But I was living in New Jersey, New York, so I started literally cold calling record labels in New York City.
Wow.
And actually, how I would cold call record labels, I know it sounds probably very funny to you, but
No.
I didn't know what I was doing. So I whipped out, once I landed the song on the record, I looked through my whole CD collection, and on this right hand on the spine, it says the record label name, and I wrote down every record label name on a notepad. And I know it sounds hilarious, but I had no idea if, for some reason, any of these companies might be in New York City, which is hilarious. But I just had no idea.
Yeah, yeah.
So I literally, the first call I made was to 411, and I said, "Hi, by any chance is there a Sony Music in New York City?" Literally, I'll never forget, the operator was like, "Please hold for your number." I was like, "No way, they're in New York City." And so I wrote down the phone numbers of every record label, and I called the first record label, which
I wonder
was,
if that's even still a thing, 411.
yeah, I don't even know. So I called the first record label, which was Epic Records at the time, and I literally called up and I said, "Hi, I have these songs. I would like to show them to somebody who's involved in, like, music, you know." And they're like, "Do you know somebody here? Because you have to be a manager or a lawyer to be able to pitch stuff to us." And I hung up, not sure what to do, and I thought all night long, and it hit me late at night that night that, well, I definitely can't be a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. And I thought to myself, is there a rule saying, like, I can't manage myself? And I called back the next day, and I said, "Hi, I'm a manager, and I manage a songwriter. Can I please speak to somebody in the music thing?" And the operator, like, whoever answered the phone from Sony was like, "Please hold." And they transferred me to A&R. And I started leaving messages and begging, and one day I just kept calling. And one day I called, and this guy, Marvin Peart, actually answered the phone. And that was my first meeting. And I was pitching my songs.
So how did you transition that? Because he's thinking, okay, I'm talking to the manager.
Yeah.
Do you have, like, an alter persona?
No, I just walked in and I said, "Hey, I've got songs," and
Yeah.
you know, and he didn't, you know,
He didn't care.
Yeah, he didn't care. So, but in that first meeting, again, I had no idea what I was doing. In that first meeting, I played him a song. He didn't love it, and he said, "Well, since you're here, I just want to let you know I'm looking for songs for this girl." And he held up a picture of Mandy Moore. He's like, "I just signed this girl. She's kind of like a Britney Spears kind of thing. If you have any pop songs that would work for a girl like this, you could send them along." And there was something about that moment that clicked for me that, like, wait, they're also, like, they're looking for artists too.
Yeah.
Like just something about him holding up the girl. I was like, maybe I could find the girl too, or the guy too. And so I started calling all my musician friends. I was like, if you know any guys or any girls or anybody that sings, like I'm bulldozing my way with persistence into record labels. And I met this girl, Virginia, through a musician friend of mine, and she was 16 years old, and she used to sing at this coffee shop. And I went in, and I heard her sing with my friend, musician friend who knew her, and I had no idea what I was doing. But I realized that my songs I was writing were better than hers. And so I met with her in the karaoke coffee shop thing that she was doing, and I said, hey, I want to write a song for you, and I want to pitch you to labels. She had a really cool voice. And I basically wrote a song for her, which she did not like. And I just begged her to sing it. And then I bulldozed my way back into Marvin's office. And I was just trying to pitch songs. And I thought the artist thing was just like you show people artists and then they sign them or not, but you're not involved in that. You just write songs.
Sure.
So I walked into Marvin's office. He listened to the one song I wrote with her. And I never pitched an artist before. And he literally, which this is crazy. He literally, this is the first pitch of an artist I ever made. I have no idea what I'm doing. And he looks at me and he goes, man, he's like, I don't like this song at all. And he goes, who wrote this song? And I was like, I did. And he goes, okay. He's like, but I really like the girl's voice. And I showed him a picture of her and he goes, I might be interested in her though. And I said, okay. And then he says to me, what? And for a vice president of A&R, if the management doesn't know what they're doing, like, that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to go along for that ride if you don't know what you're doing as a manager. So this is really crazy because this is Sony Music in New York City, the vice president of A&R for Epic Records at the time. And he literally says to me, he goes, so what's your role with her? And I said, what do you mean role? And he goes, well, what do you want your role to be with her? And I said, I have no idea. What should my role be? And he goes, well, are you her manager? And I said, I don't know. I said, should I be her manager? And I had no idea what a manager even was. And I knew maybe representing her, but that's it.
Yeah.
And I said, should my role be a manager with her? And he goes, well, do you want to be her manager? I said, I mean, I guess, yeah. And he goes, I think you should be her manager.
That's hilarious.
I mean that doesn't happen.
No.
And
that's hilarious.
And I was like, okay. And I walked out of Sony that day, and I literally hit the streets of New York. As soon as I hit the sidewalk, I was like, I guess I'm a manager.
That's so funny.
And that was it. And
so that's how you became a manager?
Yeah, and I just stumbled my way through, learning it. And, obviously not doing it that well for several years, but...
Yeah, and that's, the patience comes in there. So during those several years, what were... If you can kind of think back to that, what were some of the big roadblocks or things that you kind of kept butting up against when you were early in your management career?
I would say number one was access. I realized that I needed to, and there was tons of A&Rs back then. There was A&Rs falling out of trees back then.
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Sure.
I knew I needed to know a lot of A&Rs. So just building relationships in New York, and in mainstream music, it's like two different sides of the country.
Yeah.
So I had to build relationships in New York, and then I had to build relationships in LA, and that was just hard. Yeah. It was hard to get into people's offices. It was hard to network. But you just keep going every single day, and you wake up and you do the work, and you keep calling and keep networking and keep pushing, and God keeps open up doors, and then I would say just my lack of experience and not really knowing what I was doing. I would say one big roadblock for me in the beginning was just not understanding the attitude and personality of how I needed to operate with human beings. Like, I grew up in a situation where I kind of would sometimes watch a family member kind of blow up a bridge to get what they wanted. And I kind of learned that as a kid, and I did do that a little bit in the beginning of my music industry career, and I saw how destructive that was to a relationship. And so I think, just and then also realizing, I think it took me a little bit to realize that the record label is truly a partner. And I kind of viewed the record label as like, you should be doing this more, you should be doing that more, and it's truly a relationship, and it's truly a partnership, and you have to take responsibility for your end of the partnership, and not expect them to carry the weight. So I think those were some roadblocks in the beginning that I had to learn, and some of it I learned the hard way.
Yeah, interesting. So fast forward, this was what year was this that you would have like gotten into management or had that conversation?
I would say like 2000, 2001.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when did it start to like click? Like when did that patience kind of turn into, you use this, I like this metaphor of sort of planting a seed and watering a seed. I love that because that's the thing that you can control.
Yes.
You show up every day, you can control watering it. You can't control whether it blooms and whether the sun shines on it in the right way. So what was the moment where that seed started to break through as a manager?
Yeah, I would say the first maybe 3.5 to 4 years, something like that. I was kind of limping along. There were some artists I got deals for. There were some artists I got development deals for back then, which obviously doesn't really happen too much anymore. But none of those deals really materialized into much, and I was definitely kind of struggling. And I'll never forget, maybe about a year in, my girlfriend at the time, females are always smarter. My girlfriend at the time said to me, "You know what, Jason? I think one of your problems is you need to be surrounded by better songwriters and producers." And it just hit me like I knew she was right, and I had no idea how to do that. And I went on this journey of trying to find better songwriters and producers. It was hard at first, and then I just started begging and pleading and begging more record labels to introduce me to songwriters or producers. I would just go into A&R offices and be like, I want to do this so bad, and I want to serve artists, and I want to give people a real chance, and I need songwriters and producers. Can you introduce me to somebody? And it took a lot of begging and a lot of pleading, but eventually I met a producer, and he had done a couple things on records, but he kept talking about this friend of his named Roy Hamilton, who at the time was a very hot producer. He had just done a song by an artist named Joe called Stutter, which was like a 5-week Billboard #1. And he was working with NSYNC at the time, and he kept saying, like, Jay, you're awesome. You got to meet this friend of mine. He really made it. And I'll never forget, he came into the studio one day, and I was like so excited that he came in. And we ended up going out to dinner that night, and I just felt like I'm supposed to pay for dinner. And then he was actually leaving a few days later to go to California because he had just been hired as a director of A&R for Capitol in L.A., and he was also being hired as a staff producer for Capitol in L.A., and which to me was like pretty big because I'd not been around producers like that. And we ended up, we were in a mall in a TJI Fridays, and I paid for dinner. And then since we were in the mall after dinner, he went into a DVD shop to buy DVDs for the plane flight.
Sure.
And he went to the counter, and I was like, I'm going to buy these for you. And it felt so cheesy, and looking back, it felt really cheesy, like buying another man's DVDs.
Yeah.
But he remembered that. And, he had said something to that producer like, man, Jay should move out to LA one day too. Like that guy's really cool. And me and the producer kind of stayed in touch, and he ended up being the first producer I ever managed. And he was landing on records left and right, and really in the mix. And he found a rapper that he thought was great, and he signed a production deal with the rapper. And he told the rapper, like, Jason's your manager. And the rapper at first didn't want me to manage him, but you know, we had a 3-person. You know, we sat down, and 3 of us.
Sure.
And the producer's like, he is your manager. You understand me? Like, he's your manager. And that was the first time I ever shopped a project to record labels that had a very serious producer involved.
Okay.
And the difference of reaction I got from record labels was literally jaw-droppingly shocking.
Just because it's got to be
the songs were better. The production was better.
Yeah.
People knew who he was.
Yeah.
There was some trust in him. Like, they knew that, you know, they could probably get to a success if he was behind it.
So that was like a missing piece of the wheel.
My brains exploded because
Yeah.
I always, even the deals I got and even the development deals I got, it was always me pushing and begging and pleading and scratching, and this was totally different. I mean, I was walking into record labels, watching A&Rs literally freak out.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they'd hit play and they'd jump out of their chair and be like, "Do you understand this?" Like, you know, and I'd be like, "I think I'm understanding it," you know. And I mean, I watched presidents like go walk around their desk, sit at the edge of the desk, and like look down at us and say, "Let me tell you about the history of Sony, and let me tell you, you're the next Mariah Carey," and I never saw labels sell me,
Yeah.
It was
the other way
and I
around.
realized, wow. And I'm just saying, from my perspective,
Yeah.
everything for me was about the producer,
Yeah.
and the songwriters, and I have this passion to try to find artists, but I was never the greatest songwriter, and I needed people around me that were, to be able to serve these people that I was meeting, and that was the missing key, at least for me. And that's when and then all of a sudden I'm getting into presidents' offices of labels, and the relationships are just growing. I mean, once you're this. I mean, once you're in presidents of labels' offices, like, you grow.
Yeah.
You learn from the meetings, and people start knowing that you're getting into presidents' offices, and deals are happening, so that was the connector for me.
Yeah, it's all the producers and the songs. That's where it starts. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but you've hinted at it in this conversation through all those years of patience and just, like you said, persistence. What part has prayer played in all of those years of just showing up and doing what you can do?
Well, that's amazing. Amazing question. So when I started in the music industry, I didn't know God at all. Borderline atheist, and brought up in a Jewish household, mom and dad Jewish. And so I didn't know Jesus at all. I didn't know the Bible. I had no idea about prayer. So when I first started in the music industry, this is what I would always say to myself. I would say, I want to meet the biggest people in the music industry. Like, I want to be at the very, very top of the mountain. Why did I want that? Because I knew that that's where, like, deals happen, and did I want the deals, like, for my own glory? Probably a little bit back then, which is why I struggled too. That was probably a roadblock for me as well.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to help people. I had a dream as a kid that I didn't even know I had, and it happened for me, and my life changed, and I wanted to meet someone that was like me, and try to help do that for them. And so when I first started, I always used to say to myself, like, I want to be around the biggest people in the music business. I want to be at the very top of the mountain. I want to be on top of the trees that are on top of the mountain, like, because that's where deals are going to happen. That's where I could help people, and probably back then, sadly, that's where I could get some self-glory.
Sure.
And it was almost like I was having a conversation with God, but not knowing it. And it was almost like God was like, "Are you sure that's what you want?" And I was like, "Yes, that's what I want." And it was like God was like, "Okay, if that's what you want." And over the course of, probably 7 to 10 years, 5 to 10 years, I grew, and climbed this mountain. God allowed me to climb it without me knowing it was him. And I got to the very top of the mountain. I was about 10 years in the music industry. And I woke up one day And I realized that I was just surrounded by no one, literally no one that had any character. And it was really a hard pill to swallow.
Wow.
And I'm not saying I was any better than that group back then, but it's just like no one really cared about people besides themselves. You know, I was, you know, I was surrounded by people that would steal things from people, or it was like the Wild West, and it was like nobody really loved people, or knew how to. You know, a lot of dishonesty, a lot of just it was very ugly.
Sure.
And right at that moment, right in that time period, I got saved, like radically. And I found the Bible, and I found Jesus, and I found myself at nighttime like crying my eyes out, you know, telling God I loved him for the first time in my life at 33 years old, which was 13 years ago.
Wow.
And I was apologizing to God for like 700 things I'd done wrong in my life, and I felt like he was forgiving me. And I just, you know, my heart was changing. And then I met my wife 5 months later.
Wow.
She loved the Lord. She brought me to church for the first time. I started learning better, learning more, and I started learning about prayer. And one of the first things that happened when I started learning about prayer was I just felt led to be praying over like what I felt like I was like surrounded by, like just I felt like I was like in a sewer, like with the people that surrounded me and just the kinds of music I was involved in. And I started praying to God, and we used to say this in a room by myself when I first learned. And actually, it was somebody that I knew's mom once walked up to me and said, right after I got saved, shortly after, 6 months in, she walks up to me. She was a little mom woman, and she looked at me and she pointed at me and she goes, "Jason, when you pray to God, do you pray boldly?" And I was like, "No, I mean, I don't pray bold. Like, that's God, you know." Like, you know. And she's like, "You need to pray boldly," and that really hit me. And the first bold prayer I ever prayed, and I prayed it a lot, was, "Lord, you are God. You know, you are endlessly infinite. Anything's possible. Surely there has to be people in the music industry, songwriters and producers, or just people in the business that artists could work with, that actually have a heart to serve people. That actually, like, they are at the top of the mountain, they are great at what they do, but they actually love people, and they know, and they're safe, and like there has to be somebody on earth like that."
So, man, and even just in sort of preparing for this, like as I was listening through some other interviews and things you've done, just that really hit me in terms of just prayer. It's such a simple thing that I was convicted in that moment of like, man, as a believer, that should be the first place I go for everything. Like when I wake up in the morning, that should be the first conversation I have. When I walk into a big meeting, that should be the thing that's on my head, and not like, how am I going to impress this person, or what's the strategy here? It should just be prayer. And man, you know, for a lot of people out there who aren't believers or Christians, listen to that. It may sound kind of woo-woo or whatever, but I mean, I can say for me, that's what works. And obviously for you, that sounds like a big turning point.
And I have noticed this because I've just been, you know, I've been in and out of praying like I should be, you know, for, you know, at least the last decade. And there's been seasons where I'm praying like literally over everything. There's seasons where I've prayed before every phone call, before every meeting. There's been seasons where I'm literally on my knees in my office alone before just a typical meeting comes in, asking God to show up and for him to speak through me and give me clarity, give those people clarity, whatever. But then there's been seasons where I forget and I don't do it. And what I've noticed that's been amazing to me is every time me and my team go into a season of praying for artists we're working with, I mean, I can't deny the results. And it's not that we're doing it to get the result. We're just doing it because that's the right heart to have for others. But the difference of like successes that come versus don't, I mean, it's a very noticeable difference.
For a lot of people out there who maybe don't realize what all a label does and why an artist would need a label, I think your story with Austin really hits the nail on the head that labels aren't generally signing artists who are at square one.
Right.
They have to have something going, and obviously that starts with the music. Music's got to be good. The voice has got to be spectacular. But then there's got to be something going on top of that. Like is the artist already out there touring?
Yeah.
Maybe not nowadays in COVID thing, but are they releasing music? Are they getting traction on the playlist? Are they starting to get a little bit of radio play here and there? And then that's really when you need a label, is for a format like Christian music or alternative or country, which is very still radio driven, despite what a lot of people think. It's still very radio driven. That's when you need the label.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's smart how you guys have been going about that.
Yeah.
So can you talk about obviously Austin French? I love what's going on with him and having a lot of success in the past couple of years. Have some really good songs. Love the Born Again radio single.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the lessons learned in artist development recently? Because this is, and I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but if you'll allow me to.
Sure.
This is one of the great things I love about our podcast is since we started it even 4 or 5 years ago, the music business has changed so much.
Right.
And probably since we did, this is interview, I don't know, a 170 or something like that. Since we did interview 10, things are completely different. So this is where I love to get to ask these questions. But when you're thinking about artist development, what are some of the things, like when that person sent you Austin French from the Rising Star show?
Yep.
What, obviously the voice has got to be great, but what else? Like, what are you looking for in art, like in an artist, when you want to invest or bring other investors alongside?
Yeah. So I think. The first part of it is, obviously the potential, the seed of potential has to be there. I think the first part of it is I usually catch some sort of vision for an artist, like some sort of general direction, whether it's a musical direction or it's probably more in the beginning a genre direction. So when I first saw Austin on television, on the Rising Star show, the second my eyes laid on him on TV, I heard the Holy Spirit say to me, he's a Christian singer. And I didn't even know he was a Christian.
And he wasn't doing Christian music on the show?
No. And I saw his entire career happen in a split second. And I knew he was going to make it in Christian music. So, and that's just the vision I got for him. Some artists I meet and I'm like, they're an alternative artist. I mean, I've met artists that tell me they're a country artist. I'm like, you're not a country artist. You're an alternative artist. Like, or vice versa. Like, so I feel like. Is
that just like a gut thing, or how is it like the sound of their voice, or how are you kind of interpreting that?
I just feel like I've met so many artists over the years, and I've been doing this for so many years. And I've seen artists, this is important, I've seen artists change directions over the years, where I knew the artist for 5 years, and, 1 minute they're a country artist, and the next minute they're an alternative artist, and the next minute they're a Christian artist, and it's just like, no, like, you were always that artist, you know? And so I think seeing artists change over the years, like, as they're growing, realizing who they really are, I think, just the kind of music that their parents were listening to growing up, to their heart. And, I feel like that's maybe one of the things I'm good at, is getting a vision for an artist. Mainly in the beginning, just general genre. Not the pinpointed sounds. And so, like, for an example with Austin, when he walked in my office, I mean, I had in my head, if he's down with being a Christian artist, I'm down. And if he's not, we don't have the same vision. And so I think a lot of it starts off with vision. And, do I feel like this artist and I have the same thing that we're seeing? And then it's just, trying to figure out, like, how well does this person listen? How coachable are they? I mean, I would say, I don't know, I feel like more than anything else, I view myself as a coach. And I feel like, I've taken all these failures I've been a part of over the years, and thank God's, the successes I've been a part of over the years. And I feel like I'm always coaching and teaching. And so if I have somebody that's really open to coaching, that's not too sensitive, that isn't too precious about what they're doing, is just, malleable, doesn't take things too personally. I could tell some hard things too, and they choose, I could put a fork in front of them and say you should make a left, and they end up, understanding why I'm saying a left, and they make the left. I think just shared vision is so vital to have a shot to get there. And I think the coachable thing is, so when I'm working with an artist, usually what I'm doing, especially like in the beginnings like that, everything I'm doing almost every single day is just coaching, teaching, coaching, teaching, coaching, teaching. It's like, okay, how do we get their vocals better? And I mean, I've when it comes to vocals, not only will I usually put a singer in with a vocal coach, but I'll also if there's a certain, like, for example, like if they're lacking emotion, I'll send them like isolated vocals of like Paul McCartney, screaming his head off in the studio and saying, do you hear that? Like I'll send them isolated vocals of Michael Jackson, like crying on a record. And then 2 minutes later, he's screaming his lungs out in the vocal booth. And it's like, do you hear how free and fearless they are? And like that's where you need to get to. And just always planting seeds, like showing them, YouTube videos of like live performances. Like, like do you see how this person is engaging the audience right now? Do you see, how are they moving their hands right now? Like you need to move your hands and arms more when you perform, down to the microscopic details. If an artist doesn't know how to put themselves together, I'm getting my wife involved, who could be a stylist, and just like we're working through outfits. And I mean, it could be literally haircut. It could be how you're trimming your facial hair. Like, I mean, I am involved when it comes to the growing up of an artist. It's like every single microscopic detail, down to like, how do you walk into meetings? Like, what are things that record labels want to hear, and why do they want to hear it? And making sure that the artist isn't just faking that answer, but that they understand why they need to have their heart in that place and think like that, and how to tell their story. How to walk in a room and light it up. Just all those different things. So, I mean, I'm always searching. My brain is searching at all times, like looking for any ounce of lack of education that the artist has, lack of knowledge. I mean, I have artists like this trio that I'm developing right now. I mean, I have them watching music documentaries. I have them, and I'm like, do you see where the artist made a mistake there? So, I mean, I have this group all watching documentaries every week and reporting to me what they got out of it. Just so when they walk into the music industry and they walk into labels, they have this kind of history and they understand, like, just the business and why things work, why they don't work. And I also do a lot of coaching on just making sure the artist understands the actual real deal industry. Like, like when I'm like when an artist gets signed to a deal, do they really understand how radio works? Do they really understand what radio looks like, the odds of it all? How good their first song is going to have to be. Why songs are getting beat up on radio. And I mean, I'll send artists charts every week, and I'll tell them certain things to look at on the charts. And do you notice that this song is struggling? Like, let's talk about why it's struggling. Like, and not that I've got that all down and I know the answer to everything, but just the education part of it. I've learned that a highly educated artist who is smart and open and coachable and listens well, if they've got the seed of potential and the seed of talent, you could grow that over a couple of years. But it's the coachability and their listening skills that I think are the greatest assets.
Yeah. Well, in that, you hit on a really good point, that if they have the knowledge as a foundation, or the education as a foundation, then it helps them overcome those seasons when emotion is going to run rampant. Which, if you're an artist, you're going to be emotional. Like you should be. That's part of why you're an artist. And there's going to be seasons when the biggest battle to win is this voice inside your head of saying, why is this person achieving success and it apparently looks like they just happened overnight, or why is this song working and my song's not working? Like those are the biggest battles. So when you set people up, I love how you talk about that as a coach and a teacher. You're just preparing them for that.
And also too, I mean, there's endless details that I could probably remember that I'm coaching on all the time. I mean, I'm just always coaching.
Yeah.
But even like understanding that, hey, if you get into a room with a songwriter, like someone like you or what, like you're not going to get into that room 20 times.
Yeah.
Like at the best, you're going to get in that room 10 times.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe 5.
Right, but
You're really good.
But at best,
Yeah.
like never more than that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're gonna get in the room 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
So like, I also work with artists too on like one thing I do with artists is the second I start working with them, I have them start sending me every 2 weeks mandatory, and I mark it off on my calendar, and they tell them to mark it, and I'll remind them if I don't get it. Mandatory every 2 weeks, they have to send me a song title list. They have to send me a song concepts list, and they have to be digging for song ideas and title ideas and concepts every single week. And I'll sometimes have an artist do that for months and months and months before I allow them in a writing room.
Yeah.
Because I know that, they have to walk in with a seed
They're doing the
that
work.
raises the level. It's like I always talk about how Tom Brady makes people around him better football players.
Yeah.
Your job as an artist is to walk in the room and raise the level of the room, raise the inspiration of the room.
Yeah.
Walk in with a song title that you sit there and say, wow, man, like that's a great title.
Yeah.
Like if you can't do that, it doesn't mean you can't have a career, but it sure helps.
Yeah.
And so, and then when somebody asks you what's it like to work with that artist, you're like, well, they're kind of a real deal thing. Like they had a great voice, they had great song ideas. And then you're more likely to like go back in a room with them.
Right. Exactly.
So it's coaching on so many different, angles. So.
I love that. That's so good. Well, before we jump into our lightning round, just because you hit on it briefly, I'm always interested. What are the most recommended music documentaries that you have people that you work with watch?
Well, and I always go kind of on kicks that I'm on.
Yeah.
So I would say right now I am madly in love with the new Garth Brooks documentary on Netflix, The Road I'm On.
Yeah.
To me, that should be a mandatory watch for any artist that's trying to get into the music industry. Episode 1, it's 2 episodes. Episode 1 tells you all you need to know, and it kind of explains his road to getting a record deal. And I tell everybody, like, that road to him getting a record, like, I tell everybody, this is the #1 best-selling artist in music history.
Yeah.
And he was walking into labels with what would become his first #1 hit.
Yeah.
And nobody saw it.
Yep.
But what did he do? He kept going. And that's why he got a deal.
Yeah.
And so, and I tell people that that's not some wow story.
Yeah.
That's not like, wow, I can't believe he did that. That is the music industry. Like, and One Republic a couple years ago had a documentary that's on Netflix.
I haven't seen that one yet.
That is fantastic. It shows that they had apologized.
Yeah.
They got dropped from a label. The label didn't recognize it. They didn't know what to do. They put it on MySpace, became the #1 song on MySpace. That's what led them to their second record deal.
Yeah.
I think the David Foster documentary
it's really good.
is fantastic.
Really good.
I think it just shows like just how passionate and determined, how he pushed singers. And it also shows like, I love the example in that documentary of Chicago, how he's trying to make them modern. He's working on Chicago's best album ever.
Yeah, top seller. Yeah.
And the horns player is forced by David Foster to get on keyboards, and the horns player like hates him for it. But it was dropping his ego and dropping his identity as an artist, and being willing to just bury it to make a great record
Yeah.
that allowed Chicago to make the best record that they had ever made. And so I show artists that. And then there's also, like, I think on YouTube, I think, and this is just stuff I love, but I love John Bon Jovi's speech when he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He talks about how he got a record deal, how he went to radio stations himself after no label, was interested in him with his first hit song, Runaway. And he got that song. That song was playing on 7 states on a bunch of radio stations before he got a deal. They're also on YouTube. They have the behind the music of the Go-Go's from the 80s. It shows that they had a top 40 hit, We Got the Beat, across the country, and labels were still saying no. So I mean, those are some of the ones that I lately have been pointing artists to.
Yeah.
Just so they understand, like, this is what you're walking into. Like, this is a very, very seriously tough journey, but it's the perseverance, it's the not quitting, it's the being coachable, listening, and being willing to stick with it that eventually can land you somewhere. So
I love it. So this has been awesome. We could probably chat for another 3 hours on all of your successes and things you learned from the business, but I know you're a busy man. You've got 117, you've got the Radar label group, you've got Awaken Records, you've got a lot of stuff going on, and you're also an author. We didn't even touch on that in this conversation. So we are going to do a deep dive on why write a book.
Okay.
How do you release it? All the good stuff like that, because you've been a part of a few of those now.
Yeah.
So if people are interested in checking out the deep dive, then go to madeitinmusic.com. Check out the show notes for each of the episodes. The one for this deep dive is obviously going to be right there. So madeitinmusic.com. Jason, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Is there anything you'd want to leave our audience with as we're signing off?
I think I'm just so thankful that you brought up prayer. I would just encourage people to pray about things and develop as much of a loving relationship with the Lord as possible. And the Bible says that He is a lamp to our feet, and I have seen that play out in my own life. And so, yeah, I would say prayer.
Good. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jason. You're doing amazing work. Thanks for taking the time to be here with us.
Thanks for having me.
What's up? Thank you for watching the Made It in Music Podcast Season 3. If you want to check out any of the other episodes from Season 3, click up here. And we talk in the show about these really cool deep dives with all this extra bonus content. And if you want access to all of those, click here.